Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We're within a week of the NFL draft, and our next show, we're going to do our final mock draft of the season. That'll be a great show, fun show this week for that. Right now, in this episode, we're going to talk about how we feel about our current roster heading into the draft. We're going to look at ranking team positional needs, and based on those position groups, and maybe what we could do to have a signing or two right before the draft to kind of solidify some weaker position groups. Keith, welcome in.
Yeah, it's something that John Snyder tends to do every year, is right before the draft, sometimes the morning of the day one of the draft. They sign 2 or 3 players to veteran min deals. And the idea is they're just draft hedges. They're like, hey, if this draft gets away from us and we don't get that middle linebacker we feel we need, here is a very low cost vet that can be there. And these are non-guaranteed contracts. And they're really just like, hey, if we need a player, here's a player on a vet min deal. And if the Seahawks do get the player they want in the draft, well, then, some point between now and training camp or during training camp, these guys get cut. But just giving them some flexibility is the idea.
This is not just like, oh, we're going to sign you and then next week we're going to cut you after we draft the guy in that same position group. This is, Seahawks, let's be honest, have 53 players under contract right now as they head into the draft. That's a little light. They normally would have anywhere between probably 60 and 70 players under contract. It doesn't mean they're going to make the club. They're going to go into training camp with a 90-man roster. Mm-hmm. So what that means is at 53, you take a look at the draft, currently have 10 picks in the draft, plus undrafted rookie free agents. They've got a lot of young people that are going to be brought in, mm-hmm. almost 40 to take part in training camp. And, they may, depending on how they manipulate the cap, want to leverage some players out there to add at least a little bit more veteran presence as they go through camp.
Mm-hmm.
And so it to me, it's fascinating that they've kind of gone in to this point in the offseason with only 53 players under contract. And that has a lot to do with where they're at with the salary cap, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they tend to go in at this point, like you said, being around 70 players, 75 players. Sometimes they draft their guys and then they sign a bunch of undrafted free agents, and then in order to sign their draft picks, they start cutting guys that have been around the practice squad for a few years but never made the team. You know what I mean? The Cody Thompsons of the world.
Yeah.
And they start cutting guys like that in order to add their actual draft picks to the roster. This year, they're going to be able to put all their draft picks and all their undrafted free agents on the roster and still have space. The idea that they're going to have 37 rookies added to the roster in the next couple of weeks is insane.
It is.
It's crazy.
It's exciting, but it's insane.
It's also think about all of the guys that are going to be second year players that are on the roster too, because last year's draft was a great one. And yeah, it's just a lot of unknown with the roster still.
Yeah. Well, I know, just like I've done, several mocks, and it's exciting because I think we can come out of the draft with at least 7 or 8 impact players. And what I mean by that is guys that are either going to be starters on this roster or guys that are going to have heavy rotation minutes to contribute. And so that part's exciting. The part that's unknown that you're talking about, obviously in training camp, is just a whole bunch of guys competing that don't have really any experience. A lot of undrafted rookie free agents, priority guys that they want. Now that's fine. Hopefully we can find some diamonds in the rough and all that kind of stuff. I would imagine after this draft, this is going to be very active for John Schneider on the priority free agent market because undrafted guys, because they do need to fill out that 90-man deal. And what we're going to try to talk about in this show is, okay, where are we the weakest in our position groups, and what are some of the players that are currently out there in the free agent market that we could bring in? Obviously, not a lot of money to spend, so maybe we're not going to talk about some of the bigger free agents that are still out there, but guys that kind of round this roster out a little bit and help mitigate some of the youth and inexperience.
Yeah.
So we were going to rank the position groups by need, and my first one, I'll just start, is the defensive line. Just we are lacking defensive line starters and depth. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about prior to kind of getting into this conversation is rumors are out there, and they're not necessarily rumors. They kind of came for Richard Sherman's show and Diggs's comment that Quandre Diggs had mentioned on Richard Sherman's podcast, and Richard Sherman let out the idea that they were going to have a scheme realignment potentially on this defense, and I think he said something like Pete's going to go back to the old scheme, and that's kind of raising eyebrows right this time of the year because the roster's already been kind of manipulated a little bit in the off season, and we're heading into the draft, and that, if true, would completely realign the thinking going into the draft and what they still need right now as far as what's existing on the roster. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's
Did you hear that?
no, I didn't hear that. I haven't kind of been watching for anything like that. I've been really tuned into draft stuff for the last couple of weeks. So it's possible that um we have um I just missed it, but that's so weird because you look at what they've done like on the defensive line, and the fact that they've got so few defensive linemen on the roster at the
Yes.
moment, and they went and they cut guys um that might have fit better into the old scheme, um and brought in guys that
Yes.
you
Right.
know kind
Right
of
now, you
don't.
look at the roster, Keith. There's two starter level players between defensive tackle and defensive end on this roster. Brian Monet is hurt, and he's not really an NFL
He's not
caliber
a starter.
starter. We got Dre Jones, Jerron Reed, and then we've got Miles Adams. Again, another kind of back end rotational piece, a replacement level player. And so we've literally got two guys. And when it comes time to put a 53-man roster on the field, you can have 9 guys, 9 or 10 combined between defensive tackle and defensive end on this roster. And
Well, if they
so
go
we're
if
missing 7 players that are going to make this roster on our defensive line right now.
if they go back to a 4-3, then you have to start accounting for um, guys like Daryl Taylor, Robinson,
True. That's true. Yes, true.
as being on that list too. Um,
Yes. Alton
but
Robinson,
man,
Tariq Smith, Boy Mafe, they would be counted towards the defensive line. That's true.
but those are defensive end, and then you're saying that um, Jones and Reed are going to be um, 3 techs, maybe the 5 tech against the
Yes.
run as you split Jones out there, but you're still missing a nose. You
I would
know,
have to imagine, Keith, they can't be waffling this back and forth. I would still think that they would do some sort of a hybrid front where they would do combo multiple
mhm.
fronts, but they would lean towards what they do well. What they didn't do very much last year was get after the quarterback and be aggressive, not just hold point of attack, which is kind of that 3-4 mentality where you're asking guys to two gap, basically hold a spot and allow your athletic linebackers and safeties to do the trick on making tackles and so forth. But Yeah, I just found that very interesting. I would highly suggest you kind of check that out a little bit, because there's like the chatter right now around what they're going to do in the draft is completely changed. And I don't know. It just seems kind of weird that it would come out of Richard Sherman. And he's very well connected, as everyone knows. And it fascinates me.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it might be when he says, um, a realignment and going back to the old system, that might have more to do with coverage than it does the front seven. Um,
Yes. I mean, he was talking to Diggs, obviously.
yeah, I was talking to Diggs, and he himself is, a cornerback. So what they did last year, as far as coverage, is they went away from their cover three, which they've done since Pete Carroll came to town, and maybe they're going to go back and play more cover three, less cover two.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe that's what he's talking about, not a complete realignment of the front.
It's very possible. Yeah.
But still,
Okay.
they still need, no matter which one they go, they still need defensive linemen, and that was your point, and that is absolutely correct. That is the number one need on this team is defensive linemen. They need to get at least two high quality, either starters or large minute rotational guys out of this draft.
I think so. And there's a few players that Seattle's already had in their system, that we could look at. Al Woods comes to mind first. Puna Ford, obviously, still out there.
Both of them are still out there, which surprises me.
Frank Clark is another player that we might be able to get on a low cost 1 year deal to come in and play in this system. I would almost anticipate that Frank Clark would end up being on this roster again, um, just because of familiarity. And at this point in free agency, he's not going to get a contract. He's not going to get a big contract. He's going to come in on a 1 year deal. Hopefully it's going to be more than veteran minimum, but it's not going to be over 3 or 4 thousand or $4 million on a 1 year deal. I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if he'd come in though, because if you're a guy that's used to making 14 million a year,
But who
um,
else is going to give him that?
maybe nobody. Maybe you sit a year, or maybe you like basically wait it out and you go, you know what? I'm here. I'm in shape. Somebody's going to get hurt. You're going to need me. I'll come in and help you out. And hope that a team, offers him that. I've seen guys do it before, so have you, and it's worked out for him. So if
It's
he's
true.
not getting the contract he wants, that just means that there isn't the need, but that doesn't mean that he won't get it. He'll just get it later.
Probably the one guy that I would really like to have them look at that hasn't been affiliated with the Seahawks before is Ashawn Robinson. Ashawn Robinson's sitting out there. He's kind of a run stuffing defensive tackle type,
Mhm.
and I think he would be a really good fit to kind of a younger version of Al Woods, if you will.
Yeah.
And
He'd be a great nose if they could get him to come in on a reasonable contract, $2 million, to come in for on a 1 year deal. Basically, it's like, hey, come in, rebuild your value and hit free agency again next year and hopefully get a bigger contract.
agreed.
So,
Yeah, there's other guys. Obviously, Chris Wormley's out there. Dwayne Smoot, Jadavian Clowney. I wouldn't personally be interested in that. He just gets hurt too much.
mhm.
Um, so anyway, there's some guys, but it seems very likely based on who's available out there, how much money we've got to spend. We might get one of those guys. Al Woods might come back, or Puna or Frank on a little deal. But it seems likely that we're going to draft at least two defensive linemen, and I'm talking like defensive tackle types out of this draft. Now, edge wise, the list of players we have on the current roster is pretty much, if we went into the season with that, I think we'd be okay.
Mhm.
I still think we're going to end up drafting an edge guy in the draft,
You can
but
never have enough pass rushers.
yeah, but it's down the list on priorities now. If a guy like in the draft, Anderson's available, obviously at 5, I think the team would probably jump on that. But otherwise, they may wait a little bit in the draft to get a guy that's a back end guy. How
So
about you on the second? Go ahead.
I read a thing saying that basically, Malik McDowell is causing the Seahawks to um, seriously doubt Carter at 5 and making them very apprehensive of making that pick, which does not surprise me at all, given what happened with Malik McDowell. And this is a top 5 pick. You can't afford to, um, completely screw it up and get nothing from it like they did um, in the past. So,
Well, I'll say this on that. Those two things are completely unrelated, but they have talked quite a bit in the last 2 or 3 years about character and about um, that being a larger factor in their evaluation process. And they've really done quite a bit of work on the psychology aspect of the game, the interview process, the history of players, the adversity and grit and all that kind of stuff come into play. Um, and you're right. You're right. But I would, uh, if they've done all their homework and they've come to the conclusion that they can bring him into the fold and have him in the system because he's the best player available, and he probably will be on their, you know, if he's on their board still and they've done that homework and they're comfortable, I'm comfortable.
as
At
far
the
as
same,
pure athletic talent and ability and just put it all out there, he's the best player in the draft. He is legitimately the number 1 player, and should be the number 1 player on any big board that's not, um, positional value centric, which is what, I mean, that's why you see quarterbacks at the top, but the quarterbacks aren't as good. They're not gonna make the impact in year 1 that Carter will. Um, he's worth the risk, but at the same time, maybe the Seahawks are like, "No, character is important." Look at last year. Last year, they had one of the best draft classes of any team in the last decade. Uh, all high character guys.
now let me ask you this: based on what we've got on the roster right now with Dre Jones and Jerron Reed, essentially play his position. Those are the two starters we've got on the entire roster at defensive and defensive tackle if we stay in a 3-4. How does that impact the need equation part of the draft for the Seahawks?
I don't think it does. I think that you can get yourself in a situation where you can get all these guys on the field. Um, and okay, so you go light at nose tackle, fine. Jaron Reed's um, not the nose tackle that this team would probably desire as a starter, but he did play nose tackle for the Seahawks for a couple of years, his first couple of years with the team. He can do the job. And so going light a little bit there in order to get a special player on the field, you just do it.
I think as well, getting Carter at 5, if that happens, does not preclude the team from getting a Mozzie Smith at 20 or backing
Mhm.
up to 25 and pulling the trigger on that, or a guy like Ika out there at a true nose tackle, 3-4 nose tackle at 300 and almost 40 pounds. It doesn't preclude them from getting another guy. Okay, what on your list is next as far as priority needs?
Um, this one was a little like, okay, the first one, easy, done. Um, my brain went to inside linebacker because I'm like, oh my god, they desperately need help there. But they've got the 2 guys they believe are starters. And so I went the other direction and went with the interior of the offensive line.
I did too.
Yes,
Same.
yes, they've got their um, their 5 starters on the line, and they've got a little bit of flexibility. But the truth is, they need a center, they need a guard, and they need good players that can come in, maybe not week 1, but at some point this season be ready to be starters. And by next season, be starters. They need guys. And they are not going to be able to just sign guys. There's just um not the quality out there. So I
Yeah,
was looking for guys that, they might be able to sign. Um, there's a couple guys that I'm surprised are still unsigned. But I don't think they have the cap room to go get an AJ Can.
yeah.
Um, and I would love to see Justin Britt come back on a 1-year prove it deal. He only played 6% of the snaps last
Is he
year
still?
because of
He's not still
injury.
out there, is he?
Yeah, he is.
I
He
thought
played
he was re-signed by somebody.
well. The over the cap does not have him. They've got him still as an unsigned player.
Oh, okay.
So,
Maybe they
um,
haven't signed the contract yet or something like that. But I thought he didn't go back, but he
mhm.
went somewhere else. Yeah, like that. You mentioned Gabe Jackson's still out there. Gabe Jackson, I know that they cut him and he was going to make $9-10 million this year, but now he's still sitting out there. He's definitely a hedge guy for a team.
I don't know
Maybe,
if he would come after being cut because
yeah,
he
I
was
know,
too expensive.
right?
He would come back on a 1-year non-guaranteed deal,
Yeah, three
at
million dollars. Yeah,
or
right.
even less. I would say one and a
Less.
half, maybe, just under 2. Um, I just don't see that happening.
I mean, if he's a
Um,
humble guy, maybe. If he's not, he's got some pride. Maybe that doesn't. You're right.
if you're gonna sign that deal, you sign it with a new team. You don't sign it with the team that just cut you and said you're not worth it.
I know that's tough, but
You
you never
go
know.
and basically you're signing it to prove yourself to someone else. There, a guy like Dalton Risner,
Hmm.
the left guard from the Broncos, would be a good hedge to come in and be that third, that swing guard if you don't get one in the draft. Um, I'd like to see that move done because I think that could be done fairly cheap.
Most of the
Um,
time, Keith, like some of these guys, not all these guys are going to be signed, obviously, but after the draft, when teams aren't successful in getting
mhm.
a starter level player out of the draft at a position of need, that's when these guys can kind of come into play. Dalton Risner.
Yeah, some of these guys. But see, if you are an agent for these guys, you're looking at, okay, right now, there's 10 teams that are looking for a guard. On Sunday, once the draft is over, there might be 2 teams looking for a guard.
True.
So what you're getting as far as offers and all of that, it just disappeared. There's nothing left money wise. So
Well,
you got to be careful.
true, and whether it's guaranteed or unguaranteed comes into play as well. They might end up with a small little guarantee prior to the draft. After the draft is probably going to be unguaranteed.
Hmm.
Um, and then Connor McGovern's out there, center. He doesn't have great Pro Football Focus grades or anything like that. It'd just be a filler piece for me. How about your next position group that you think needs attention? You mentioned linebackers. I do have linebacker depth on my list, but it's down just a little bit further.
Yeah, see, linebacker was my next one, but I think you're gonna go wide receiver. Is that
I
right?
I have a wide receiver number 3.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about that because they've got their 2 starters. They've got a couple of young guys they like. Tariq Young comes to mind as being the number 3 guy, and they still are trying to get something out of Dwayne Eskridge, which I just have no hope for at this point. If he gives us something, then I will be ecstatic, but, um,
Yeah,
at this point, I'm not counting on it, but there's not anything else. It is an
fair
empty
covered.
room, and there
Yeah.
should be ten
Yeah,
guys on
right.
this roster.
Absolutely. And there will be after the draft and after, rookie free agents are signed.
Mhm.
But a lot of young guys. That's why it would not surprise me, Keith, in this draft if the one of the first 5 picks in this draft is a wide receiver
Yeah.
because they need a guy, not only just a guy, they need a guy to come in and maybe uh, not only make the roster, but really have an opportunity to work into that third role because Derek Young's not proven. Now there's a lot of promise there. Eskridge unproven. We just don't know if he's going to get out of training camp as far as being healthy. They need a guy. They really do.
Mhm.
And so it wouldn't surprise me if one of those 5 picks is used on a guy that can really come in and have an immediate impact because if you get somebody in the 4th, 5th round, there's no guarantees at all. There's no guarantees in the draft anyway, but you have better opportunity.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
same thing. And there's a few guys out there. I wouldn't want any 3 of the guys that I had on my list here as far as free agents. Jar- uh, Jarvis Landry, Galladay, and Julio Jones are the 3 kind of impact wide receivers still out there on the market, and none of those guys to me are even. Now,
Julio
we
Jones
last
a
year we
couple of
had
years ago,
Marquise
he's
Goodwin came in, a late contract last year as kind of a hedge. Ended up
Mhm.
playing significant minutes and had a pretty decent year. I'm just not anticipating Seattle hedging this position before the draft.
I actually before the draft, I don't know because there's enough guys out there that I think they can get away with not doing so. A guy like Laquan Treadwell, who was with the team last year, um, and played on one of those non-guaranteed, just over $1 million kind of deals, is a guy that would fit that same contract, same role, to be that fifth receiver type of thing. And I could see them doing that. Um, Other than that, I mean, it does get hard to find um, a great fit as far as
I
all this
think
goes.
I think Seattle missed the boat a little bit. This is one of the positions I think they probably should have, in the first couple weeks of free agency, waited for the second tier market to open up a little bit and kind of pulled a guy in
Mhm.
to fill that role because it's going to be important. This team does lack that and have for a few years that really steady third presence, third option for Geno Smith is going to be important. Now they've got a pretty decent tight end group, and but you take a look at running backs, and running backs the next on my list. You take a look at running backs. There's really nobody on the roster that's helping you out in the passing game for Seattle either. You've got Ken Walker and DJ Dallas. That's it. They jettisoned Thompson, their third guy that was probably going to be a practice squad guy, any Darwin Thompson.
Mhm.
Uh, there's only two running backs on this roster. Period. There's no young guys, no guys that are thinking about practice squad guys. There's nothing, and nobody. DJ Dallas is okay out of the backfield catching passes, and he's really not a number two guy that you'd prefer to have on your roster. And so, I think like running back would be a position that they might sign somebody right before the draft, like a Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt. I understand. I had some inside knowledge, by the way, I need to share with you on Kareem Hunt and a couple other prospects, and an interesting run into last night at a party uh, that that's football related. But Ezekiel Elliott, Darrell Henderson, Miles Gaskin, Kenyon Drake are names out there that could come in as hedges that if it didn't work out in the draft, you could have one of those guys make the roster and go into the year as the number two or number three back
Yeah, but
on
a
this
lot of
team.
those guys that you named are guys they're sitting there thinking they're gonna make a boatload of money, and
And there's no money.
are they gonna come in for a non-guaranteed, $1.2 million contract? I don't know. I would say, um, Jerick McKinnon, who spent last year with the Chiefs, um, on a non-guaranteed $1.2
Yeah,
million contract, is a guy that, I think is more likely to come in. I guess Kenyon Drake was on a contract like that last year, after
yeah.
not
Henderson, I think, would be nobody's going to really think Henderson would be the first choice on this list, but he played in this offense, and he's a guy that they may consider.
Mhm. Um, but yeah, there's it's odd to me that they're going into the draft with such an unfilled roster.
Right,
I can't say
right.
that. Um,
This could have been number one on the list if you really think about it. Now I know people say that analytics guys, running backs don't matter, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take a really look, just a genuine look at the roster, this is the weakest position group on the team. It's almost the same as the defensive tackle spot. Ken Walker, DJ Dallas. That's it.
mhm.
And this team's going to go into the season with four running backs on the roster. Obviously those two are going to be there, but there's two guys we don't even know about right now. They're going to make this team at the running back spot, and we don't know if they're going to be quality guys or guys that are just rookies that don't know anything yet. So we'll see. I would again wide receiver position. I said first five picks in the draft. It wouldn't surprise me if the Seahawks also use a higher pick on a running back out of this draft, just because of the weakness of the existing roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact at both of those positions, with wide receiver and running back, the fact that you've got your top, right? You've got the Seahawks have 2 of the top 20 receivers in, the NFL on their roster. They've got, one of the better running backs in the NFL on their roster. I think that pushes the need down a little bit compared to the defensive line where they don't even have a nose tackle on the roster. That's an NFL caliber player. So,
I'll give you that.
but at the same time, you have to have depth. If you don't have depth, you're not going anywhere in this league. You've got to have other guys. So,
Let's talk about
yeah.
linebackers.
Okay.
So, based on what we talked about early in this show with regards to possibly schemes, we could have a completely different conversation, but let's just kind of go with what we were thinking we were going to head into this season needing and what we currently have. We're seemingly pretty good as far as starters are concerned. We got Bobby Wagner, Devin Bush, Jordan Brooks on IR. Indications are he could be ready closer to the beginning of the season rather than the middle of the season, but just for this sake, we'll say he's not going to be ready. But we've got our two starters, quote unquote, but there's really very little depth as far as the middle of the defense on at the linebacker spot. Now, as far as rush linebackers, outside linebackers in the 3-4 scheme, we're pretty decent as far as the initial depth is concerned. So let's just talk about the differences in those two position groups within that larger group and where we stand.
Well, yeah, because you want guys like Boye Mafe on the outside that can rush the quarterback up on the outside, but also play against the run, drop back into coverage against running backs and tight ends, and do those kind of things. In the middle, you don't really care if they can rush the quarterback. I mean, you're going to blitz them occasionally, but that's not where they make their money. They are run stuffers. They are guys that read, react, get up, make plays at the line of scrimmage. They are the guys that chase down opposing's mobile quarterback. They're, covering in the middle of the field in the zones in there. They're just completely different skill sets as far as what you're asking guys to do. And so there's not a ton of overlap in terms of, oh, well, if somebody gets hurt, you just move this player over and bring in another guy. Unlike when they were a 3-4, or sorry, when they were a 4-3, you could do a little bit of that, right? You could, Bobby Wagner would get hurt and they'd bring in, KJ Wright from the weak side to the center and just plug away. You can't really do that in a 3-4. You just have different skill sets, and they're good on the outside. They've got a lot of those edge guys, but they need help in the middle. And I think that is where, they signed a couple of guys, and they have Brooks, who at midseason will be back, but that's the end of the depth chart unless you count like John Radigan, who's hung around this team because they really like what he
They
brings.
do like him.
He was on IR all last year, so we'll see.
And spent twice on IR. Yeah. That's why I think in the draft, that somebody like Drew Sanders from Arkansas kind of comes to mind as a guy that could come in and play in the middle for them, but he's also scheme diverse enough where he's a very good kind of edge guy as well, an outside linebacker. He's kind of a hybrid linebacker, if you will. He's 235 pounds, 6'4", so he's got decent length. He's an average size guy to be a middle linebacker and a little light on the edge, but as far as scheme wise concerned, if you're worrying about roster spots, a guy like that makes a little bit of sense where he could go help you inside if Devin Bush falls back a little bit or Bobby Wagner's nicked up, Jordan Brooks isn't going to be back initially. You can plug and play a guy like that rotation wise in the middle, and then when Jordan Brooks comes back, you've still got Devin Bush. A guy like Sanders could move around a little bit for you on a defense and still get snaps. But the linebacker free agent market, there's some names out there. A lot of guys on the edge: Marcus Golden, Leonard Floyd, Yannick, Trey Flowers, Justin Houston, Carlos Dunlap still out there, Robert Quinn. But then you've got guys like Anthony Barr, Rashawn Evans, Quan Alexander still out there too. So there is a few guys there, probably guys you could bring in for under $3 million.
I'd look at Jalen Smith.
Jalen Smith,
who's played on a $1 million non-guaranteed deal last year and played 55% of the snaps for the Giants and is still a good player. A guy that that people may remember from Seattle, KPL Kevin Pierre-Louis is out there as a potential guy that has some speed and can make some plays and stuff and be a special teams player plus, backup, perhaps. And so there's some non-names that I think would be in play for Seattle that haven't have would have a potential to come in and make an impact, um, even if they're, not guys that you're going to keep around long term, like, multiple years or anything, but they could come in and really help you out in this 1 year. I think you mentioned Rashawn Evans. That's kind of a guy that I would look at and be like, if we could get him in, that would be kind of cool. But
Yeah.
overall, yeah, I mean, it's a position group of need for Seattle. And there's enough guys out there that I think that they can wait until after the draft and the need for guaranteed money goes to zero. And that guys are just trying to get on a roster.
So the next position for me was safety, and it's not a huge position. Obviously, now we're down to the sixth position group that I'm listing here. But the reason that I brought that up now is that after Quandre Diggs and Julian Love, we really don't have a lot. We've got Jamal Adams, obviously, and it sounds like he's going to be ready but he hasn't even finished a season with the Seahawks yet. 3 seasons in, every year has been impacted by injury. Obviously, the first season was really decent, but the last two, he's barely seen the field. And
Mm-hmm.
then Ryan Neal's off. We've got Joey Blount possibly coming back and making this roster. But it seems like there's a spot. And when you take a look at the cornerback room, there's possibly a spot for kind of a hybrid kind of safety, a guy that can play on the back end with Diggs, dropping back into two high safety looks, and a guy that can come up and play the slot a little bit. And Julian Love, prior to this show, I went out and watched some Julian Love highlights just because I wanted to familiarize myself with just what an impact that he can make. I really like Julian Love as a player. But really, we've only got two starter level players on this roster.
Well, two, and then Devontae Adams, who's kind of the wild card because he's
And
still a
Jamal
two.
Adams,
Sorry, what did I say?
Devontae.
Um, okay. I'm I've got a list of 100 names in front of me, so I'll use that as my excuse, and not that I'm, um, you know, having troubles this morning. But no, he's a two-time All-Pro, right? So I think that is why he's still on the roster and hasn't been cut. Um, but are you going to get the two-time All-Pro, or are you going to get the guy that made $18 million to not play last year? Um, and that's the issue. That's the problem. Um, but I started looking around at the free agent market, and um, there's some interesting guys out there that I would consider. Nasir Adderley, who was with the Chargers last year, would be a guy that I think you could get on, that the kind of contract that we're talking about, the 1 year non-guaranteed, just over $1 million, minimum salary benefit contract. And there, like I said, he's a guy that was on there. Uh Ronnie Harrison, who was with the Browns last year, Rodney McLeod, who was with the Colts, Kareem Jackson, who was with the Broncos. There's just guys that are out there. Nasir Adderley, I think I already said.
Yeah,
Um,
Adrian Amos, which has played in this game before with the
True, but
Chicago Bears,
he's a guy that got paid a lot of money last year and had a major drop off in the quality of his
and he
play.
and he, and he's
So,
still out there. So
yep.
John Johnson, another player that
Hmm.
has also played in this scheme, well, in this type of defense anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's not a huge priority. I was just gonna throw it out there as possible, only because of your idea too. The cover three change. They may want an extra defensive back on this roster this year,
Hmm.
as opposed to an extra linebacker. So we'll see how that goes. And
Well,
the last one that I
they
had on the
they
group
need
was
both.
that's true. The last group was corner. And the only reason that I brought this up, and I put specifically corner upgrade, and the question mark for me was is the team completely satisfied with the level of play of Mike Jackson, or would they consider upgrading this position, not necessarily as a hedge, but possibly in the draft at that spot? And I just thought it was interesting. But overall, the room isn't horrible. Obviously, Tariq Woolen, Mike Jackson, Trey Brown, Kobe Bryant. Um, you could even add Julian Love in there, because Julian Love's going to play all over the place, and he's going
Mhm.
to play a lot of covering the slot for this team, compete there with Kobe Bryant. Those guys are going to be back and forth, and then Trey Brown obviously is kind of a guy that you can plug in on the outside as well as coming in on the inside. So they're pretty well covered. But
Mhm.
I was just thinking they're going to add one more guy to this group, whether that's in the draft, I would anticipate, or a hedge type player. Anybody else out there attractive to you?
I mean, he wouldn't come back to Seattle and they can't afford him, but it is interesting to me that, Shaq Griffin is out there available.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
having
that's a fall for him. I kind of feel bad for him, but you know what? It just hasn't shown up on the field for him.
Well, he signed a massive contract with the Jaguars, and they do this because they're so bad. They're so, like, not
Yes,
talented and everything. They keep signing guys to well above market, contracts in order to get them in the building, and then they don't make it through that contract, and, um, that's just where he's at. I mean, he is a guy that,
he's still young. He's
he's
played for
he's
Pete. I mean, they like him.
Oh,
He
yeah.
just wasn't worth the contract that he would sign when he left the building. He was like 13 million a year, and he was more of an $8 million dollar guy now, and then it's dropped off even a little bit more since he left. And now
Mhm.
he's looking at probably a 1 year deal, prove it, the
Yeah.
$2.5 million on a back end kind of a roster filler spot. That's where he's at. And so maybe it is a thing where Seattle brings him in, but at the same time, he wasn't that good when he was here. You know,
He was good. I
he
wouldn't go
was
say
solid,
that.
but was he any
He
better than Mike Jackson?
See,
I like
I
Mike
I I don't
Jackson better.
I don't have a problem with Mike Jackson. You keep bringing up,
Well, I
replacing
do, only
him,
because I think coverage skill wise, he's not the greatest coverage guy now. Coming up and making tackles as a corner, which Pete values. He's a great physical cornerback as far as a guy that can come up and make plays and tackling, and that's really important as a corner. He does that well. Both
and
both he
if
and
they go
Woolen
to
are
more
excellent at that.
if they make go to more cover 3, then he actually has the skills to be outstanding.
I agree that. I
And
agree with
so
that.
I am not so quick to replace him, especially when okay, let's say he has a I mean, it's not really sophomore because he's been around longer than that, but it's second year as a starter, he has a little bit of a sophomore slump.
Well, I gotta ask you
You've
this,
got
Keith.
plenty
He
of
they
guys on
only
the roster that could cover
he's
for him.
he's only a 1 year guy though. So he's had last year was a 1 year contract. This year is a 1 year contract. If the team really believed that and believed in him, would they? I know that he's a restricted guy. That's the easy way to manipulate money and contracts for the team. I get that,
Mhm.
but it doesn't seem like they're in any hurry to extend him or anything like that. He's not at that level yet.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago, he'd played, like, 1.5 games, and did well, but it was 1.5 games, and then he got hurt. There was no reason to sign him at all, to anything more, and plus he was an exclusive rights free agent, so you sign him to a 1-year, deal at the absolute minimum, and you roll with it. Yeah, as a he was a restricted guy this year, and so it's a like you said, it's an easy way to manipulate, the cap and that kinda stuff, but I just don't like this team doesn't do a lot of, "Oh, well, he could be a restricted guy, but we need to sign into this big contract early."
That's true.
They just don't feel like they need to. Um, and it's honestly, it's smart play with the, salary cap not to. Now, next year they'll have a choice to make. Do they want to pay him or do they want to turn his spot over to the Kobe Bryant, Trey Brown or whatever rookie they draft this year? Or but there's options and there being options means he's probably not going to make that much money here in Seattle. If he's going to make money, it's going to be elsewhere.
So the final conversation point in this show is the long snapper position.
I knew
We
you were going to do
currently
that.
don't have a long snapper on this roster, Keith, and quite frankly, I'm not sleeping well at night thinking about it.
So Tyler Ott, has been the guy, and then last year got hurt, didn't play. Carson Tinker came in, and you wouldn't have known there was a difference because, I mean, that's the best thing you can say about a long snapper is that you don't know, um,
Yes.
you don't notice them. If you don't notice them, that means they're not screwing up. And so, either of those guys will be back, maybe both of them for the start of training camp, and then they'll fight it out, and one of them will win, and the other one will stay in town in case the other one gets hurt because there's not a lot of jobs out there for long snappers anyway. Um, but yeah, I am not as concerned with you as you are about, this. I'm not losing sleep over a long snapper. Um, so, well, there's that.
Yeah. Well, I think one of those guys is going to be back. Both those guys are sitting out there still. Tyler Ott's had a little bit of activity as far as meeting with some teams, but prior to the draft, nobody's really concerned about this situation. They could find a guy,
Nobody,
undrafted rookie free agent, to come in
yeah,
and
nobody's
hold down
drafting
the
a long
fort for.
snapper either. So
Yeah, correct. Yes. Unless he's an all-world special
how
teamer, like a one of the fastest guys in the field or whatever, which is unlikely. Or he plays a second position or something like that. But yeah,
if he's one of
no,
the
you're not going to
fastest
draft.
guys on the field, he's a long snapper and then can get downfield and cover because he's got a ton of speed. Then he's going to be a linebacker or a safety, and he's
I
going to have a
agree.
chance to make the roster. At one of those positions. So, um, yeah, there's that.
Okay, so that's it. I mean, the roster's not as developed this time of the year as I wish it was. But here we are. We're out of money. We're heading into the draft with 10 picks. We'll see how that goes. I think they feel comfortable heading into the draft with the roster that they've got, obviously, because they're not, signing some of these guys ahead of time. They would have to manipulate the salary cap a little bit to kind of do that. And it doesn't really count right now anyway, but they kind of want to stay at least within the margins of being able to do that. So, any final thoughts?
Um, no, I think, yeah, it's like I said, it's weird that they don't have more people, on the roster, but that just is what it is.
It is. I think we'll be okay. I think we're going to go into this season okay. I mean, most of the guys that are currently on the roster, there's 53. I think most of those guys end up making the roster. And then we've got room for, 8 to 10 guys that we draft that will make the roster. We're going to have some young guys, which is great. That's exciting. We've got 5 picks in the top 100. All those guys are going to make the roster. And we've
Mhm.
got some really decent picks, after that I think will have a great opportunity as well. So, yeah, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. The show is on your favorite podcast platform under Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can go onto our website or follow us on Twitter, and all the links are there that you can get to the show on, as well as our YouTube channel. We've got a great YouTube channel. If you're watching this show, you already know that. If you're not, go check that out. Seahawks Playbook Podcast on YouTube, and make sure you hit the subscribe button. Sorry. And until next time, go Hawks.
Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWCHawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.